Spain was important to us because that was like our Washington. And that's where those Moors on this side of the world could meet there, just as Moors from the other side of the world could meet there, and we all commune there and we build right there. When Spain fell, that basically broke up our communication, because now we couldn't really build with each other the way we needed to, because now we're all basically forcing ourselves to fight against our light-skinned children, who are now called, today we would call them Puerto Ricans. At the time, they was called Spaniards. The people that today are called Spaniards were actually the slaves of the people today we would call Puerto Rican. We lost Spain to our light-skinned Spanish-speaking children, you know what I'm saying? Because we stopped breeding with us and us alone, you know what I'm saying? Because remember, at the time, we're dominant.
Granada was blocking Isabella's vision of a unified Spain, and so it had to be reclaimed. The city was laid to siege for a year before it finally surrendered.
On the 1st of January 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella, dressed in elaborate Moorish outfits, which they'd had especially made. With great pomp and circumstance, they entered the palace of Alhambra and took the keys to the city.
Isabella, and Ferdinand and all of them, they were Moors. They were light-skinned Moorish people who converted to Catholicism for political power. This has nothing to do with, so when we left Spain, or allegedly kicked out or expelled, right, really what was happening is we were saying, okay, you're going to be able to run this now for 800 years and hopefully you'll do a good job.
Isabella's victory in Granada put an end to an incredible society. In the 700 years that they'd been in Europe, the Muslims of Al-Andalus had built a culture which was the very pinnacle of civilized life, influencing Europe in ways that we're only just beginning to understand. And Isabella would endeavour to ensure that Islam in the West would never enjoy such a relationship again.
A few years after Ferdinand and Isabella came to power, they set up an organisation that affected the most extreme form of religious control that Europe has ever known.
The Inquisition.
The purpose of the Inquisition was to track down and eliminate anyone who wasn't an Orthodox member of the Catholic Church.
Those found guilty of heresy were subjected to a sinister public ceremony called an auto de fe. In this eerie ritual, vestiges of which are still performed today, the guilty were forced to repent their sins while their accusers watched on, hidden under hooded caps. The sinners were then detained. Some were burnt at the stake. Most had their homes and livelihoods taken from them.
Because when the war went down between us as a family, it went down between two color extremes. You would say the red and the blue, and it's the same to this day. When you had the Union and the Confederacy, it was the red and the blue, or the red and the gray. The same thing with the Crips and the Bloods, the red and the blue. Just like today in Republican Democrats, you got the red states and the blue states. Because that also represents the two extremes of blood types you have in your body. You have the DNA structure, which is the red, which means you have a higher iron content in your blood, and then you have the blue, which represents the RNA, which is a higher copper content in your blood. This is where you get the term blue blood. So really, what's happening is it's two extremes of the same family bloodline going at it with each other.
It was very common for Muslims to ally themselves with Christian factions, especially when Christians were warring with each other.
It must have been quite a surprise to discover that your ancestor was a Muslim.
Yes, a great surprise. This is because there had been a chronicle which dated back to the 16th century, in which the Guzman family had cleaned up its political and ethnic past. Guzman was said to have been born in León. They didn't just do this with the Guzman family, but with all the families that had doubtful ancestors of doubtful race. They cleaned it all up. We have a whole load of documents here from the Spanish register, And they turned everything we know about Spanish history upside down. The Spanish are simply inventing history. They have turned history into a fable.
Now again, when we deal with history, we got to take into account that most people are getting their history from people that were not there to record it. So it's always going to be up for conjecture. It's always going to be up for debate. There's always going to be somebody saying that the Kemites was not black. There's always going to be people saying the Moors wasn't black. There's always going to be people saying that black people have no history other than slavery. But that has to exist in order to create the negativity for us to rise above to become perfect. Because this is what I'm talking about. We had to create that doubt. We had to create that imperfection in order for us to coexist with it, to rise above it.
El Cid and Guzman el Bueno weren't simply Christian soldiers fighting a Muslim enemy. If anything, this was a civil war, with both sides desperately scrabbling for land and wealth.
The idea that the Reconquest was something cut and dried, black and white, something that cleaned up society is absurd. I don't know who came up with that idea.
The Spanish historian Palencia, who said that the Reconquista was nothing but a civil war between Spaniards of two different faiths.
Spain is full of dazzling reminders of how the righteous Christians won the country back from the diabolical Moor. The country's most popular saint is called Santiago Matamoros, St. James, the Moor Slayer. But this romanticised version of history distorts the true nature of this conflict. This was not a holy war. Al-Andalus was destroyed in a dirty grab for land, which lasted for over 300 years. And in this conflict, the more refined society was the one least equipped for war. It was the Christians who had little to lose and most to gain.
When Isabella and Ferdinand died, this is where they were buried. It's a little corner of the Alhambra, and it's decorated with inscriptions from the Quran. They read, "There is no true God but Allah." In many ways, it's a curious choice for a Christian entombment, but it does speak of that complicated relationship that was enjoyed by the Catholics and the Muslims. On one level, it says that Isabella and Ferdinand were still half in love with all things Islamic, but on the other, it's a bold and uncompromising statement of control.